That sound was the first sound Peli heard when she met Baby Yoda, her introduction to the creature. What was that sound? It could have been some compartment opening in the ship, but it didn't really sound like metal or hydraulics. That sounded organic, like an animal. But it doesn't sound like any sound we've heard Baby Yoda make up to this point. What is Baby Yoda? That was an awfully big sound for such a little guy. Listening to this scene, it occurred to me that that was a horror movie sound. That was a sound that happens before something jumps unexpectedly out of the dark. The first watching, I just assumed, like everyone else, that it was just to set up the jump scare, to give Peli something to react to, a reason to pull out the blaster rifle. But I think after a few episodes of this show, we can safely say that nothing is nothing in this show. Everything the writers put in, everything the directors polished down has a reason. Now, I don't know what that reason exactly is, but it really got me thinking, what do we know about Baby Yoda? We have assumed that he is a member of the same species that Yoda and Yaddle belonged to. But we really don't even know that. The tracking fob is a fascinating bit of information. It was incomplete. Later episodes that focused on the tracking fobs revealed that it had something like the biometrics of the target in it. Why would the biometrics be incomplete? Why would all they have be his age? That is fascinating. Even the Empire, which had the medical scan, only had the age. Then again, there's the little problem of Yoda's age. Now, Yoda was supposedly 900 years old when he died, and acted and behaved like an old man nearing senility and death. The baby is said to be 50 years old. People have pointed out through various math that either Yoda aged very quickly and died at the human equivalent of 27, a crippled old man, or that the species simply might just not age at the same rate that humans do. This is true. A baby alligator is essentially an adult from 2 hours after it hatches until its death many, many decades later. A baby horse can get up and run across the plain a few hours after its birth, meaning it has to functional maturity rate of about an hour, whereas a human takes up to 2 years. So it could be that Yoda's species simply has a different rate of aging at different stages in its life. But people keep going back to this. The ages really don't add up if we assume the same rate of aging. Again, going back to that creepy sound, that was an awfully big sound for such an awfully small species, and we have never heard Yoda make any similar sound, the original Yoda. And we've certainly never heard the baby make that sound. Then we come to my previous video, the bone soup. How did the Mandalorian, and more especially how did Peli, know to get him bone soup? Now, if the child is force sensitive, which he clearly is, most force sensitive species have some telepathic ability. But it's often one of the last abilities to be developed. Lifting rocks is one thing, getting into somebody's head and influencing them is another. So, rounding out our points, we have the tracking fob that lacked the relevant data, something that was very, very peculiar to the bounty hunters. You had the age not quite adding up. If that child is 50 years old, then his age should have been either much longer than 900 years that the original Yoda showed, or else has a drastically different aging process. Then you have this creepy sound. What was that noise that happened just before we hear Baby Yoda's coo? Then again, we have this fascinating aspect that just by chance the Mandalorian is keeping droids away from Baby Yoda. The only droid that's seen him would be the IG-11, who the Mandalorian immediately shot before the droid could observe anything other than that the species might age differently. The Imperial droid, who the Mandalorian also shot. I'm beginning to see a pattern here. But since then, he's made quite the effort to keep any droid with the intelligence to make any observations away from Baby Yoda. So here's my question. Is it really a Baby Yoda? We don't know. Because in Legends at least, and I know you've got to be careful about comparing Legends and the modern extended universe, but in Legends there were several shape-shifting species. One of the main ones, one of the most ones that were active in the one of the ones that were most active in the canon, were the Shi'ido. Now the Shi'ido were humanoids with pale skin, wide mouths, and deep-set eyes. They were very pliable physiologically, with their skeletons able to shift and change. Now, one of the interesting things about this species is that they have a very long lifespan of up to 500 years, but it's noted that they do not reach adulthood until the age of 61. Now, this would put the child, if it's a member of this species, right around the age of 14, which is a little bit old for his behavior, but we could be looking at symptoms of trauma here. He's been kidnapped multiple times, carted around by various bounty hunters. He could be very deliberately playing the role to get protection. Or again, the aging process might be slightly different. The other interesting thing, though, is that species also possess a form of telepathy completely separate from any abilities in the Force. They do have Force-sensitive individuals, but they use this ability to project false impressions upon those of other species, allowing them to cover up any inconsistencies with their transformations. Now, naturally, this wouldn't work on droids, but it wouldn't have to work on droids, because the Mando has been conveniently blasting the processors out of any droid that gets close enough to mess with Baby Yoda. And while they do not develop their shape-shifting abilities until later in life, they do have the ability to manipulate their skin color. That's how they primarily communicate with their caregivers. And it's hard to tell from the material available, but they do seem to have pointy ears in their natural form. Also of note is that the Shi'ido do not lose their shape-shifting when they fall down and become exhausted. They maintain whatever form they're in until they willingly change out of it. This does make some interesting points. A child of 14 years old would have been old enough to begin Jedi training before he was kidnapped and found by the Mando, or at the very least develop his own natural Force tendencies. How this child got off of its home planet? Well, the adults of the species are, while being very shy and retiring, do seem to have sort of a collective wanderlust that kicks in as they get older. This child might have been born off-world. Now, the point I keep circling back to is the tracking fob. Why was it incomplete? Well, if it's a shape-shifting species, then no tracking fob would be exactly tuned to their biometrics at any one time. All they could really know would be the age of the specimen. And that's just a thought that occurred to me as I was rewatching episode 5. So what do you think? Are we really dealing with a Baby Yoda? Or are we dealing with a faux Baby Yoda? A baby Foda? Could this be a just approaching teenage years Shi'ido, who's laying low and hiding out with the Mandalorian. One more little interesting thing to note before we sign off. The Shi'ido were, canonically in legends at least, very family-oriented. They would stick around family as distant as a nephew or niece and be devoted to taking care of them. And that would really tie in with the found family theme that's dominated the show so far. That's just my little theory. Please comment below. Do you think we're dealing with a baby Yoda or a baby Foda? And do you have any ideas for any other shape-shifting species that it might be?